Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Today is episode 8 of the Cryptid Files, a series where we explore the creatures that lurk on the edges of folklore and fear. Case File: The Chupacabra. Status: Unconfirmed. Reports: Ongoing. It begins with livestock. Goats, chickens, small animals found dead. Not torn apart, not dragged off, just left behind. No signs of struggle, no evidence of a chase. As if whatever happened was over before it even began. Farmers would wake early, before sunrise, before the heat, expecting the usual sounds. Rustling, movement, life. But instead, silence. A kind of silence that doesn't feel normal. The kind that makes you stop and listen a little closer. And then they'd find them. Bodies lying still in the dirt. In pens. Near fences that were never broken. No tracks leading in, no tracks leading out. Just the animals, exactly where they should be. Except they weren't alive anymore. At first, it didn't make sense. Predators do not hunt like this. They leave evidence. Claw marks, teeth marks, a mess of feathers or fur. Something. But here, there was almost nothing. Except for one detail that kept coming up again and again and again. Blood. Or rather, the lack of it. Reports claimed the bodies had been drained. Not partially, not carelessly, but completely. As if something had deliberately taken it. And always, those wounds. Small, precise, puncture marks at the neck. Too clean to be random. Too consistent to ignore. Some describe them as surgical. Others say they look unnatural. And the more people looked, the less sense it made. No clear predator. No known animal that hunts this way. No explanation that fully fits. And yet, it kept happening. Different farms, different towns, same outcome. Animals found the same way, marked the same way, as if something was moving. Quietly, unseen, watching from just beyond the edges of fences, just beyond the reach of porch lights, just beyond what people could explain. And with every new report, the story grew. Whispers passed between neighbors. Warnings shared in low voices. Lock your animals up tighter. Keep your lights on. Listen for anything unusual. But it didn't seem to matter. Because whatever this was, didn't make a sound. Didn't leave a trace. And didn't seem to belong to anything people understood. Eventually, it got a name. Something to call it. Something to blame. But a name doesn't make something real. And it doesn't make it go away. Case File: The Chupacabra. Still unconfirmed. Still unexplained. And the reports are still coming in. The first major reports began in the mid-1990s in Puerto Rico. At first, it didn't feel like a legend. It felt like a problem. Farmers started finding their animals dead. Not just one or two, but enough to notice a pattern. Goats, chickens, small livestock, all found under nearly identical conditions. No signs of struggle, no torn fencing, no indication that anything had forced its way in or out. Just animals left where they were kept. Still. Too still. And then came the detail that made people uneasy. The one that kept getting repeated, no matter who you asked. The blood. Or the absence of it. People didn't just say the animals were killed. They said they were drained. Completely. Now that claim has been debated. Skeptics argue it could be decomposition or misinterpretation in the shock of discovery. But here's the thing. When dozens of people in different places describe the same thing, it starts to feel more than coincidence and starts to feel like a pattern. And patterns tend to mean something. As the report spread, so did the fear. Because it wasn't just the deaths anymore. It was what the people said they were seeing. At first, those stories were quiet, shared between neighbors, mentioned in passing, like something you weren't sure you should say out loud. But eventually, they couldn't be ignored. Witnesses began describing something, not quite animal, not quite human, something that didn't fit into anything familiar. They spoke of a thin, almost unnatural figure, not bulky like a predator, not shaped like anything commonly found in the wild. Its back, lined with spines, sharp, raised, like something defensive, or something evolved for a purpose no one understood. And then the eyes, large, dark, reflective in a way that didn't feel right. Not like the eyes of a deer caught in the headlights, but something more aware. Something watching back. Some witnesses said it moved on all fours, low to the ground. Others insisted it stood upright, balanced. Almost human in posture, but wrong in every other way. Too thin, too still, too deliberate. And the way it moved, quick. Not just fast, but sudden. Like it could cross space in a blink. Here 1 second, gone the next. No sound, no warning. Just the feeling that something had been there and now wasn't. Descriptions varied, of course. They always do. But certain details kept repeating. Spines, eyes, that unnatural presence. And maybe the most unsettling part, people couldn't agree on what it was, but they all agreed on how it felt. And it felt wrong. Like it didn't belong. Like it had no place in the natural world people understood. And when something doesn't belong, people start looking for answers. They search for names, for categories, for something to make it make sense. That's when the word started to spread. Chupacabra. A name that sounds almost strange at first, until you learn what it means. Goat sucker. Simple, direct, almost too simple for something that doesn't feel simple at all. Because giving something a name doesn't explain it. It just makes it easier to talk about. And once people started talking, the story grew. From one town to the next. From farms to entire regions. Stories carried through radio, newspapers, word of mouth, each one adding a detail or changing one. And with every retelling, the creature became something more. Not just an explanation for dead animals, but something people feared might be watching them from the dark. Something that moved just beyond the edge of lights, just beyond the places people felt safe. And even now, decades later, those original descriptions still linger. Spines along its back, large, dark eyes, a body that doesn't quite move like anything we know, a shape that feels almost human until you look a little closer, and you realize it's not. Because whatever people saw in Puerto Rico, whatever left those animals behind, it wasn't something easily explained. It wasn't something easily forgotten. And maybe the most unsettling part, it didn't stay there. As the story spread beyond a single town, beyond even a single region, something else began to take shape. Not just fear, not just speculation, a pattern. At first, it wasn't obvious. Each incident felt isolated. A farmer here, a report there. Different locations, different people. But when you start lining them up, side by side, the similarities become harder to ignore. These events weren't random. They followed rules. The attacks happened at night, not at dusk, not in the early evening where people are still outside, but deep into the night when everything is quiet, when most people are asleep, when there are no witnesses. No one ever reported hearing anything unusual. No frantic animal cries. No sounds of a struggle. No barking dogs raising alarm. Just silence. A silence that, in hindsight, almost feels deliberate. Because predators, well, normal predators, don't operate like that. They create chaos, noise, movement. Even small attacks leave behind some kind of disruption. But in these cases, nothing. No one sees it happen. Not a single confirmed eyewitness to the act itself. People don't catch it in the moment. They don't interrupt it. They don't scare it off. Whatever is responsible, it does its work unseen, and then it's gone. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, it's already over. What's left behind is where things become even more unsettling, because the aftermath is consistent. Animals discovered in the same state, not partially eaten, not scattered, not treated like prey. They're found intact, as if the goal was never consumption, at least not in the way we understand it. One of the most widely reported details is almost the most controversial. The claim that the bodies were drained of blood. Now, this is where opinions divide. Some investigators argue that what appears to be drained could be the result of natural processes, internal pooling, post-mortem changes, misinterpretation under stress. And that's worth acknowledging, because not every mystery has a supernatural explanation. But even when you strip that claim back, even when you look at the cases as objectively as possible, there are still details that don't quite sit right. The wounds. Small, focused puncture marks, often located on the neck. Not random bites, not tearing, but something more controlled. In some reports, the spacing between the punctures is described as unusually even. In others, there are only a few marks, as if whatever caused them did exactly what it needed to do and nothing more. No excess damage, no hesitation, just precision. And then there's the environment, or more specifically, the lack of disturbance. No broken fencing, no dugout entry points, no signs that something forced its way into these enclosures. And just as importantly, no signs of escape. No tracks leading away. In rural areas, that is unusual. Soil holds impressions. Grass bends. Something moving through a space usually leaves a story behind. But here, there's almost nothing to read. As if whatever entered did so without being noticed and left the same way. Some have tried to explain this through known predators behaving abnormally, diseased animals, starvation-driven behavior, creatures acting outside of their usual patterns. And in some cases, that might account for individual incidences. But the pattern as a whole, spread across different locations, reported by different people, over extended periods of time, starts to feel harder to compress into a single conventional explanation. Because patterns imply consistency, and consistency implies intent. Which raises a difficult question. If this is an animal, why does it behave this way? Why no noise? Why no visible struggle? Why leave so little behind? And if it's not an animal, then what are people actually encountering? Something intelligent? Something adapted to avoid detection? Or is it something that operates in a way we don't fully understand yet? There's another detail that doesn't always make headlines, but shows up often enough to matter. Timing. Many incidences are discovered within a narrow window of hours, late night into early morning, before sunrise, before the world wakes up again. It's almost as if whatever is responsible knows exactly when it can move without being seen, knows when people are most vulnerable to missing it entirely. And maybe that's what makes this pattern so unsettling. Not just what happens, but how cleanly it happens. No witnesses, no interruption, no clear evidence pointing in any one direction. Just a repeated sequence of events that feels intentional, measured, controlled. And when you step back and look at it all together, the silence, the precision, the lack of trace, it leaves you with a conclusion that's difficult to ignore. Whatever was responsible, it wasn't careless, it wasn't chaotic. It knew exactly what it was doing, which means it was either incredibly precise or something people didn't fully understand. For a while, it felt contained, like whatever was happening belonged to one place, one island, one origin point, Puerto Rico. But stories like this, they don't stay still for long, because eventually the reports didn't just continue, they started appearing somewhere else. At first, it was easy to dismiss a similar story in a different location, a coincidence, maybe even influence, people hearing about one case and interpreting their own experiences through it. But then the reports kept coming. And they weren't all the same people. They weren't all connected. Different regions, different environments, same kind of aftermath. Mexico became one of the next major hotspots. Royal communities, farms, livestock turning up dead under familiar conditions. The same unsettling details, animals found intact, unexplained wounds, a lack of clear predators. And just like before, people started talking. Quietly at first, then louder. Because once you hear a story that matches what you've seen, it's harder to ignore it. From there, it didn't stop. Reports surfaced in Texas, then across parts of the southwestern United States. Areas where wide stretches of land leave plenty of space for something to move, unnoticed. Ranches, desert edges, isolated properties where neighbors might be miles apart. The kind of places where, if something strange happens, you might be the only one who knows. And yet, even in those distances, the stories started to sound familiar. Animals found the same way. Patterns repeating. A quiet sense that something had crossed borders. Not just geographically, but culturally. Because now, this wasn't just a local legend. It was spreading, adapting, becoming something larger than where it started. But as the locations changed, something else began to shift too. The descriptions. In Puerto Rico, what people reported seeing felt almost otherworldly. Spines along the back, large, dark eyes, a shape that didn't resemble any known animal. Something that felt almost alien in nature. But in these new locations, that image started to change. Witnesses began describing something different. Still unsettling, but not the same. Less humanoid, more animalistic. Hairless bodies gray or molted skin, long limbs. In some cases, people describe creatures that looked almost canine, but wrong. Emaciated, with features that didn't quite line up with any breed. Sunken faces, exposed teeth, eyes that seemed too large or set too far apart, and the behavior still unusual, still predatory, but not in the way that felt familiar. Some of these creatures were even found, captured, and killed, their bodies examined, photographed, debated across news reports and online forums, and almost immediately, explanations followed. Many of these were identified as coyotes, or dogs, suffering from severe mange, a disease that strips away fur, it leaves skin hardened and patchy, distorts appearance until the animal becomes almost unrecognizable. And for some cases, that explanation fits. It makes sense. It's grounded. It gives people something solid to hold on to. But not all sightings fit that description. Some reports still described something stranger. Something that didn't quite match a diseased animal. Something closer to those original accounts. And that's where the divide begins. Because now, there isn't just one version of the creature. There are two. The original, the spined, upright figure from Puerto Rico, and the later version, the animal-like, often canine-shaped creature seen across mainland regions. So the question becomes, are they the same thing? Or are people seeing entirely different creatures and giving them the same name? Because once a name exists, it spreads just as easily as the stories do. People begin to apply it to anything that seems similar, anything unexplained, anything that leaves behind the same unsettling aftermath. And over time, the line between sightings starts to blur. What began as one legend becomes many versions of it, layered, contradictory, evolving with every new report. And maybe that's what makes this part of the story so difficult to pin down. Not just that the sightings spread, but that they changed as they did. Because if this is a single creature, why would its appearance shift so dramatically? Why would it look one way in one place and completely different in another? But if it's not one creature, if it's multiple explanations being pulled under the same name, then why do the patterns still feel so similar? Why does the aftermath remain consistent, even when the descriptions don't? It leaves you in an uncomfortable space between explanation and uncertainty. Because something clearly spread. The reports did, the fear did, the stories did. But whether the creature itself spread, or whether people simply began to see the same fear in different forms, that part is still unclear. And maybe that's the most unsettling possibility. That the legend didn't just travel, it adapted, changed shape, blended into whatever people were already afraid of. And in doing so, made itself even harder to understand. By the time the sightings had spread, something didn't quite line up anymore. It wasn't just where people were seeing it, it was what they were seeing. Because the descriptions, well, we know they didn't match. Not completely. Not even close. Over time, two distinct versions of the Chupacabra began to take shape. Two forms, two appearances, two very different creatures carrying the same name. Version 1, the original. The one most closely tied to those early reports in Puerto Rico. This version didn't resemble anything familiar. Not a dog, not a predator you could name. Something else entirely. Witnesses described a creature that felt almost reptilian. Its body thin, unnaturally so, not starved, but structured differently, as if it wasn't built like the animals people were used to seeing. Along its back, spines, sharp, raised in a line from neck to tail. Some said they looked like quills. Others compared them to ridges, or something almost skeletal pushing through the skin. And then there was the posture. This creature didn't always move on all fours. In some accounts, it stood upright, balanced, not comfortably, not naturally, but enough to be unmistakable. A silhouette that at a distance could almost be mistaken for something human, until you noticed the proportions, the shape, the way it held itself, and you realized it wasn't. The head, often described as elongated, eyes, large and dark, reflective in a way that didn't feel like simple animal instinct. More aware, more focused, like it wasn't just reacting, it was observing. Some even compared it to something extraterrestrial, not from folklore, but from somewhere else entirely. And whether or not that's true, the feeling those witnesses described was consistent. Not just fear, but confusion. Because what they saw didn't fit into anything we understood. Then there's version 2. The one most commonly reported after the legend spread. This version is easier to recognize, at least at first glance, because it looks almost like something we know. Almost. A dog-like shape, 4 legs, a familiar structure, but something about it is off. Hairless, or nearly hairless, skin exposed, gray, malted, and sometimes darkened in patches. Stretched tightly over bone. The body appears emaciated, not just thin, but depleted. Ribs visible, hips pronounced. A frame that looks like it's been pushed past the point of survival and kept going anyway. The face distorted. Eyes often described as sunken or too prominent. Teeth visible even when the mouth is closed. Lips pulled back slightly, giving the impression of a permanent snarl. And the behavior, aggressive in appearance, not necessarily always attacking, but presenting in a way that feels threatening, unpredictable. Some witnesses say it moved like a coyote. Others say it didn't move like anything they'd seen before. Erratic, unsteady at times, but still capable of sudden bursts of speed. And unlike the first version, this one has an explanation that's often brought forward quickly. Disease. Mange. A condition that can strip animals of their fur, damage their skin, and alter their appearance so drastically they become nearly unrecognizable. Coyotes with mange. Dogs in severe decline. Animals that, under normal circumstances, would never look like this. And for many sightings, that explanation fits. It answers the question in a way that feels grounded, understandable, and safe. But not all reports fit neatly into that category, because some descriptions of version 2 still carry details that don't quite align with a known animal, even a diseased one. And that's where things begin to blur. 2 versions, 1 name. So which one is the Chupacabra? The original? The spined, upright figure that feels almost otherworldly? Or the later version? The hairless, dog-like creature that can almost be explained? Or is the answer neither? Because there's another possibility, one that sits somewhere in between, that the name Chupacabra isn't tied to a single creature at all, but to a pattern, a set of unexplained events that people are trying to make sense of. And when something doesn't make sense, we give it a shape, a name, a story, even if that story changes over time, even if it splits into 2 or more. Because once fear takes hold, it adapts. It fills in the gaps. It reshapes itself to match what people think they've seen. And over time, the line between reality and interpretation becomes harder to see. So maybe there aren't 2 creatures, maybe there never were, or maybe there are, and they've just been mistaken for each other. Either way, 2 completely different forms continue to carry the same name. And that name still hasn't been fully explained. There are several ways people have tried to make sense of the Chupacabra. 1 is misidentified animals. Some researchers point to coyotes suffering from mange, or wild dogs, diseased and starving. Illness can distort the familiar, strip away fur, alter features, stretch or shrink proportions. Suddenly, an animal you recognize becomes something unrecognizable. In the dark of night, with fear already present, it's easy to misinterpret what you're seeing. Number 2 is media influence. TV, movies, and books have shaped the way we imagine the unknown. Some comparisons have been drawn to the alien-like creature in the film Species. Stories and images seep into memory, and the human mind, especially when it's anxious, when it's afraid, is excellent at filling in the gaps. A vague outline in the shadows becomes something far more detailed and terrifying than what actually exists. And number 3 is mass panic and folklore evolution. A story spreads, details shift, fear does the rest. What starts as one unexplained incident can snowball into dozens of reports. Every retelling adds a new feature, a spine, a snarl, a posture, until the legend grows beyond its origin. This is how folklore evolves. And sometimes it's impossible to separate the original event from the story that lives on in people's minds. Number 4 is an unknown predator. But not every sighting fits neatly into this explanation. Some attacks still leave questions unanswered. Some carcasses still show marks that don't match any known animal. And some witnesses never change their story. Some describe the same details, decade after decade, with consistency that can't easily be dismissed. So maybe it really is something we haven't identified yet. Something hidden, moving silently through the night, observed just enough to leave fear in its wake. Every theory has its weight. Some are plausible, grounded, even comforting. Others leave the mind unsettled. And that is part of the Chupacabra's power. It exists between explanation and mystery. And in that space, anything feels possible. Officially, the Chupacabra does not exist. It is not recognized. There is no proof accepted by science. No evidence strong enough to close the file. And yet, unofficially, the reports continue. Animals are still found, lifeless, under the same strange circumstances. Neighbors still whisper about sightings just beyond the edge of their property. The stories, they endear. Some people laugh at them. Some roll their eyes. But others carry a quiet unease. Because even without proof, there is a pattern, a fear, a mystery that refuses to disappear. And what's most unsettling is the sense that something, real or not, still moves through the edges of royal places. Silent, unseen, just out of sight. Perhaps it is a creature we haven't understood. Perhaps it is a memory of fear, passed down and reshaped over time. Perhaps it's both. Either way, the legend endures. The Chupacabra remains in the shadows, watching, waiting. And for anyone who lives in the quiet corners of the world, it is a reminder that some mysteries never truly go away. If you've ever encountered something you can't explain, a creature moving in the shadows, a sound that shouldn't be there, eyes watching from the dark, we want to hear your story. Share it with us at hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories will remain anonymous. We'll listen, we'll share, and together, we'll keep exploring the mysteries that linger just beyond the edges of what we know. Because sometimes the unknown is where the most interesting stories live. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.